We'll begin with the recording. Welcome everyone to the 27th Roundtable on Measuring Corruption. This has been going on since the beginning of 2022. And I'm very, very excited about today's presentation. Kamel Ayadi has been participating in these roundtables for quite some time. So when he approached us last year to discuss the possibility of presenting some of the very interesting work that he was working on, I was very excited, and finally we are lucky enough to have him with us today. I will, before we start, I will ask everyone to keep your microphones muted. Otherwise, I will do that myself. All right, here we go. So let me just go very quickly through the format of today's session. Kamel will be presenting for about 45 minutes, followed by an open floor Q&A. In previous iterations of the roundtables, we had a combination of the QA, meaning that at any point people were invited to interrupt the presentation, to ask questions or make comments. Today will be slightly different in that sense. So I will ask you if you have any questions to write them down, or you can also write them in the chat. And after the first 45 minutes mark, after the presentation is over, we'll begin that discussion. Okay. There are a lot of things that Kamel will be covering today, because it is not just about one paper or one work, but it's rather a reflection based on many years of experience that he has, and also in relation to what he has been observing and working on in terms of measuring corruption. So I know that I'll be writing down my questions and points, so I invite you to do the same. One more thing, if you have any questions or comments, you after the presentation, you can just click the icon to raise the hand, or raise the hand physically, and I'll invite you to unmute yourself. And if you could then introduce yourself very briefly, so that we have a chance to know where you're based, what is your affiliation, and perhaps if you want to say something about what you've been working on, that can also be very interesting. And that's pretty much it. So let me invite Kamel to the floor, and I'll ask Kamel to introduce himself, and you can also start sharing your presentation when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Joseph, for this opportunity to share my views and my experience on the issue of corruption with this distinguished participants. So I will approach the question of measurement from a practitioner perspective, which can provide different insight into the question than if it is approached from a purely academic perspective. So I will start first to understand the background of my lecture. I will first tell you my story with measurement, because I have a personal story with measurement. I have been working in the field of anti-corruption for more than 20 years now, from different perspective, first as a civil society activist, then from government perspective, then nowadays as an expert consultant and researcher. So in my outreach activities as a civil society activist, I have very much enjoyed using global indices. There are a number of global indexes that we use to describe the level of corruption in different countries. So I use them in my advocacy work. So every year when the corruption, particularly the Corruption Perception Index, the Pioneer, which is published every year by Transparency International, every year when it was published, I organized the event, including a press conference, to present, interpret the result of the CPI, and to analyze the performance of the countries in my region, in MENA countries, to analyze their performance based in the findings of the CPI. So it was, to be honest, it was an enjoyable task, because it attracted the attention of media, of public attention, and gave visibility to my work. So, but today, with hindsight, I realize that it was somewhat a naive exercise because I blindly trusted the results of global indices. I've never questioned their rationale, what they measure, where the data come from, and so on. So today I realize that what I have done was, of course, served to some extent because it highlighted the poor performance of countries in terms of fighting corruption, but it was also somewhat misleading to the public understandings of the efforts deployed by their governments. Then a few years later, when I joined the government and I became a part of the decision makers responsible for designing and implementing anti-corruption strategies, I had a different view of these indices. They didn't help me as a decision maker, and they don't help in general local actors because they merely represent the state of corruption, but they do not say more. They do not provide decision makers and local actors with the data which can help them understand what's going on, what was going bad, and how to fix and how to improve their performance. So the need of local actors, local stakeholders, decision makers who are responsible of fighting corruption is rather for tools that can tell them what's going wrong and how they can fix and adjust their strategies. So tools that just cast blame and focus on retrospective rather than perspective doesn't help them much because they need something actionable that they can use and they can use in their policies. So then when I left government, I decided to deepen my knowledge on global indices. So I carried out a number of studies. One of these studies about the correlation between different the result of different indices. I also worked with Chandler sessions, which is hosted by, for the past 3 years, hosted by the Blavatnik School at the Oxford University. And I have done some work about measurement, and I published a paper which I think you have already shared with the audience, and I can share it again. And I have been also working with the Chandler Institute of Governance, which is based in Singapore, to develop a tool which could better fit the needs of local actors and local government. Let me first please share if you can allow me to share my presentation, Joseph.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't see how to share it full screen.
There's that icon next to on the left side of that slider in the PowerPoint on the bottom right.
Yeah, but I don't see it. Yeah.
No, right on top of it. The icons that are white with a red background.
Okay.
Yes, a little over that. Yes, on the left hand. Yes, the icon on the left of that slider.
On the left of that slider, which
Yes,
one?
the first one to the left of that slider. So if you move just the cursor a little bit to the left.
You can use F5 as shortcut.
But usually it's here. I don't see it. Oh, what's the problem?
I believe we can see it.
You can see it, but
yes.
I don't see.
For what? Could you also, if you know also how to go through the menu to do that?
Just press F5. Function F5, the bottom on the keyboard.
F5.
F5, okay. Okay, good. No.
No, it doesn't.
You need to press FN. It's the bottom of the keyboard. It's to activate the function buttons, and with it F5 as well. You'll find beside Control and Windows button
F5.
there is FN.
FN
And F5, both.
FN and F5 both. Okay, sorry. FN. Where is FN? That's always
At the bottom of the keyboard beside Windows button and Control.
Yeah. FN, okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for this.
No, that's perfectly fine. We can see it in full screen now.
Okay, good. So this is the title of my presentation, Strengths and Limitations and Alternative to Current Corruption Measurement. And I will be talking about the Chandler Integrity Assessment Scorecard, which we are developing as part of our contribution to the Chandler Integrity. Okay, Okay, so in this presentation, a few words about the outline. I will try to provide the understanding of the significance of measurement, why it matters, then understand the strengths and limitations of global indices, the extent to which they can serve different purpose, and particularly local purpose, and why nowadays alternatives should be considered. I will talk about the emerging trends in measurement. Then I will be talking about the Chandler Integrity Assessment Scorecard, its rationale, its distinctive features, the design, and the technical approach. So the core question that I wanted to start with this presentation is why are measurements and assessment important in the context of anti-corruption policies? And how can they enhance global effort? There is measurement and assessment tended to be used interchangeably, but there is a nuance between both terms. Measurement is focused rather on quantifying attributes, whereas assessment is much more broader because it involves collecting, gathering data, interpreting, analyzing data in order to draw conclusions and to take action. For this reason, I would rather use the word assessment rather than measurement. Let me try to see how I can, okay, this one. Okay, so the answer of this question lies on two levels. First, the general, and the second, the specific level. The general level, of course, we can't manage and improve what we can't measure. I remember I was asked by the UNDP a few years ago to conduct a study to understand why the first generation of anti-corruption strategies in the Arab region failed to deliver the expected results. And one of the reasons behind the poor performance of the first generation of anti-corruption strategies was the absence of measurement and assessment. So nowadays, many anti-corruption strategy in different countries, they integrate assessment as a crucial part of their anti-corruption strategies. There is also a social and political dimension of measurement. Corruption is a sensitive issue. This is visible in a number of countries. It's a very sensitive issue. It's heavily present in public discourse. It's subject of manipulation, political manipulation. Therefore, there is a need for a consensual assessment of government's efforts in terms of fighting corruption in order to withdraw the topic of corruption from political instrumentalization. I think we can perhaps dedicate one presentation about this, but it's an issue in some countries, the different view of the performance of governments in terms of fighting corruption. It has become a problematic. Okay, so the specific answer is more complicated. So since measurement and assessment are essential in fighting corruption, the question now is what assessment do we need, what instruments, and for what purpose? And this is what the Chandler Integrity Assessment Scorecard attempted to answer. So the process of, I will talk about briefly about the process that led to the development of the technical methodology of this scorecard. First, we tried to conduct a study to understand the global indexes, the current measurement, their design, their purpose, correlation, data collection. Then we conducted a large review of country experiences, their personal experiences in addressing the issue of measurement. And we reviewed the experiences of 30 countries. Some of them we have done through Zoom meeting with the chairs of anti-corruption commissions, some of them through literature review. And of course, we come up with some conclusions, which I will analyze and present in this presentation. So I wanted to focus that the purpose of this initiative is not to replace existing metrics, but to offer to local governments the opportunity to use both local metrics and global indices results. So the main purpose of this initiative is to meet the specific needs of local stakeholders for a specific measurement and tailored tools. So this is the team that we work together. As you can see on above the screen, the group of experts which we work together. There are some academics and the practitioner, and our results were reviewed and by this panel of experts. And as you can see here, it was reviewed by Chair of Anti-Corruption Commission in Lithuania, in Nigeria, in Brazil, also some academics at the Oxford University. We discussed with them the findings of our research. So the question is why we need alternative tools when there are already numerous indices. I'm talking particularly about this interpretation of local efforts in terms of addressing corruption. The response to this question is because the purpose and needs for measurement have evolved over the last 3 decades. And the need nowadays is for actionable tools to support anti-corruption strategies. Most of the conventional tools, particularly the pioneer tool, the CPI, was created. The CPI was created in 1995. They played a significant role in advancing corruption at a time when corruption was still a taboo. They served outreach activities, and they contributed to putting the issue of anti-corruption on the top of the agenda in different countries and in the agenda of the international community. So they have served a great deal in creating a global movement to address corruption and to understand the consequences of corruption, their impact on economic, social, political, lack of trust, and so on. But nowadays, they have not kept pace with the evolving needs of local government. So there is a paradigm shift nowadays. The issue is no longer whether or not we should address corruption, but how to address corruption, with what tool, with what expertise, and how to evaluate the progress. So these are the first conclusion that we have came to about these indices, that they do not serve local purpose. They serve for, they were created to serve as to support the outreach activities and to support media and to support civil society activists in their advocacy. So the need today is for actionable and tailored metrics, the need for assessment rather than measurement. Local government, they need to measure not only the level of corruption, but to measure the antidote of corruption, to measure the maturity of integrity, rather than measure the extent of corruption, to measure the robustness of the preventive system in general. So local actors also need tools that can help them to enhance their prevention policies, because the fighting corruption has two sides, the curative and the preventive sides. However, we tended to prioritize the curative over the preventive side. Then by prioritizing the curative side, we tended to treat the symptoms of corruption rather than the root causes of corruption. In the public imagination, corruption, and this is I have seen from my experience, particularly in countries where the fight against corruption is driven by political purpose and by public opinion, they focus mainly on prosecution, enforcement, and they evaluate the appropriateness and the performance of anti-corruption strategy based on the number of people that we send to jail. So the real and the appropriate strategy to address corruption is a combination between preventions and enforcement. In public minds, when talking about corruption, we always use the analogy with war. We talk about fighting corruption, combating corruption, and I will use this analogy to make the distinction between the performance between both sides, the curative and the preventive. The curative side is like in war is like airstrike. They weaken the enemy, but they do not defeat the enemy. If you wanted to defeat the enemy, you have to go to the ground invasion. You have to go street by street, city by city, house by house. And instead of killing your enemy, you need only to neutralize your enemy. So you need to build a fortress to protect your management system against the corruption attacks. And what we have built here in this initiative is a system made up of 83 assessment criteria, which when they are put together, they resemble a fortress that can protect and they can fill all the gaps through which corruption can occur. Because this assessment scorecard spots all the integrity gaps, all the vulnerability in the management system, and they envisage requirement, anti-corruption requirement to fill its gaps and to create a sort of fortress around your management system. And this is the principle of this scorecard. Here are examples of a number of countries which undertook in some period of their history extensive prosecution experiences. And the result of their crusades against corruption was just like a sword thrust into water. And the most famous one in this, the last century was the Italian experience in 1990, clean hands with 800 people indicted, investigation against 520 parliamentarians, senators, and two former prime ministers imprisoned. But just a few years later, corruption has increased again, and the convicted Prime Minister Berlusconi has won the elections again. So countries which think that they can end corruption only with prosecution, they make a great mistake. According to the experience of a number of countries, we have also the experience of Brazil with Lava Jato, and there are a number of other country experiences which have undertaken massive prosecution, but they were not able to end the corruption. Here are some of the global indices. We have the Pioneer, the Corruption Perception Index, which was created in 1995. We have also the World Governance Indicator of the World Bank, which has two sub-indicators on corruption. We have Variety of Democracy, which have 4 sub-indicators measuring corruption. We have also the Global Competitiveness Indicator, which has 3 sub-indicators. We have the Rule of Law Index of the World Justice Project, which has also 4 sub-indicators that measure corruption. Here are a brief synthesis of the strengths and limitation of global indices. What you see here in blue are the strengths of the global indices, and what you see here in orange are the limitations. Among the strengths, as I said earlier, global indices contributed tremendously to raise awareness about the consequences of corruption. They created global awareness. They contributed tremendously to the advancement of the fight against corruption, and they contributed to put the issue of agenda on the top of almost every country. They have also created a global landscape as to where corruption is endemic. And they offer also insights into foreign direct investment about corrupt countries. But with regard to the limitations, we have also a number of limitations. The first limitation perhaps is that global indices, they do not rely on a common definitions. This is particularly because there is no common definition of corruption. So we don't know what they measure. They perhaps measure different things. CPI measure bribery on public sector, and others measure different things. They have also weak correlation, and I will talk about weak correlation in the coming slides. There is also a problem in the data sources because some of the global indices, they combine and they aggregate data coming from different sources. So they do not have control on the data they manage, because and the problem here that when you combine data coming from different sources, but sometimes the change in a country's score, this is true for CPI and true for the World Governance Indicator, could be driven by adding a new sources to the index or dropping an outdated one, it doesn't necessarily reflect that corruption has increased or decreased. And this is a recommendation. The CPI, they always say that don't interpret our result over time, because the dropping or the increase in the performance is that could be shown in the result of the CPI does not mean necessarily there is an increase in the performance, but perhaps it's a change on the sources, because the sources that are being used by CPI are not every year maintained and made new. So some of these indexes rely on perception, and you know that the results of perception could be biased. We have the perception is volatile, it's subject, it's easy to manipulate, it could be influenced by various means, such as propaganda and fake news and so on. So we have desirability biases, we have conformity biases, we have cognitive biases. So the results of indices that are based on perception could be misleading to government. And another problem that we have noticed that the results of indicators based on perception doesn't reflect the efforts that are being deployed by government. You can see the effort in the result of these indexes. And you know that the Trocadero paradox, which was invented by an Italian magistrate who said that the more you prosecute corruption, the more corruption is uncovered, and then the more corruption is perceived. So even when you conduct prosecution of corruption, people will see more and more corruption cases, then corruption will increase in their perception. So corruption also, the perception also, you know that our mind are controlled, our judgment are controlled by our future, and our future are influenced by the flow of information, persuasive lies, fake news, and particularly nowadays with artificial intelligence, it's not very easy to trust perception of people, because their judgment are influenced by different sources of information. So all these weaknesses, they contradict with the central purpose of the measurement as required by local actors, and particularly by anti-corruption commissions, which need to understand the performance of their strategies through actionable indicator. So local actors, they need tools that can provide them with insights into where reforms can be made. They need tools to tell them what needs to be fixed. They need tools and instruments that tell them, that assess the effectiveness of their anti-corruption policies. And they need tools that pave the way for reform and continued adjustment. Here is the result of a study that I carried out to understand to the extent to which global indices correlate with each other. So I collected the data on my country, Tunisia, for 20 years. I collected the score of my countries and the ranking in 14 indicators and sub-indicators. And we tried to see how they correlate with each other based on the Pearson correlation. And the results are shown in these charts. Out of 72 correlation coefficients, only 13% show strong correlation. 58% of the correlation coefficients show correlation, but with opposite sign. What does this mean? It means simply that one corruption in one single country it's seen to have increased in 1 year. In another indicator, it could be seen to have decreased. So if you are a government and you wanted to understand the performance of your anti-corruption strategy, what indices would you trust? The one who says that corruption has increased or corruption has decreased? So here are the different families of indicators. I put them in 5 categories, and I tried to analyze the different categories of global indices based on their alignment with the needs and expectations of local government. We have roughly 5 categories. 5 categories of indicators. The first family is the indicators that are perception-based, and their advantage, they are actionable, relatively easy to implement because the expertise is available almost in every country. They know how to conduct surveys. Their disadvantage are the disadvantage of the perception biases. They are relatively costly, and they focus rather on petty corruption, not on grand corruption. We have also fact-based indicators, which provide input based on real corruption acts. Among their advantages, they are actionable, they are relatively reliable, but their problems and the challenge is the availability of data, because corruption is hidden. So you cannot have the real corruption cases that happen in one country to base on them your findings. We have the composite indicators, which aggregate data from different sources. It's the example of CPI and the World Governance Indicator of the World Bank. They offer comparison opportunities with other countries. So they give us a global landscape, and each country can compare its results, its performance with other countries, but they have limited accuracy and they do not provide comparison over time. You can't base your analysis based on the result over years, because as I said, it could be driven by other parameters, not only the sample increase or the decrease of corruption. We have also the single data-based indicators, which provide input based on a data generated by own self, not data generated by another sources. They are relatively accurate. They are rather quantitative than qualitative. They assess policy, but they do not assess the impact. But because they do not analyze the impact of the policies, they just make assessment based on the existence of laws, existence of procedure, existence of if you have a law about whistleblowing, etc., etc. If you have a code of conduct, etc., etc. They do not go in depth to analyze the impact of the policies. And we have the proxy indicators, which measure corruption, and directly they assess the opposite of corruption. They assess the anti-corruption efforts, performance of the integrity and the preventive system. Here, just the emerging trends in measurement. We have 4 confirmed trends. This is based on our study on global indices, and particularly on our experience in reviewing country experiences. The first trend is towards homegrown indicators. So country, they tend to create their own indicator, but they continue to use global indices, but to assess the effectiveness of their anti-corruption policy, they rather rely on their indicators. The second trend is from corruption measurement to integrity measurement, measuring something that can tell us about the robustness of the integrity in the prevention system, measuring the antidote of corruption. And the third major trend is from perception-based to fact-based measures or hybrid measures. And the fourth trend is from aggregated data to self-generated data. So the first trend is towards homegrown, and the use of the word homegrown is in purpose, because an assessment tool is not something that we can import, is not something that we can order, is not something that we can ask international experts to develop. It's something that goes through a long process of testing, consolidating, adapting, improving. It means cultivating, creating a tool. And the experience of the ICRC is the Anti-Corruption Commission in South Korea. They have created a very important tool, which is being used in a number of countries nowadays. They reach the maturity level of the tool after 20 years. So it requires time. So just as most countries have developed tools to measure and control economic growth and inflation, they should be able to develop tools to measure and control corruption. And nowadays, the trend is that countries create their own tools to measure the effectiveness of their anti-corruption strategies. Let me move now here to the distinctive features and the main characteristic of the integrity assessment scorecard that we have created as part of our contribution to the Singaporean governance and the governance center. So these are the main these are the main distinctive singularities of the tool. It's actionable, implementable, and cost-effective. It's cost-effective because it relies on self-assessment. It fits perfectly with the current trend. It's provided and presented to local government because we are now implementing in a number of countries. It's presented as a framework for a homegrown tool. So every country can use the framework and customize it based on the local context and develop it and try to adapt it to its context. It's also a capacity building tool. Here you have the main criteria of actionability. An assessment scorecard to be actionable should show some relevance between the goals and the objective and the effectiveness of the policies. Cost effectiveness also because it's a self-assessment, so it requires minimum resources. It's also considered as a normative reference based on which every single public institutions can benchmark itself. It's also require ownership and responsibility. There should be a responsibility and strong ownership by local actors to be able to manipulate and to use this tool. So here are the first singularity, which is the homegrown aspect. The tool was created with the homegrown aspect in mind because it leaves room for customization, adaptation by every countries. Nowadays, we are working with Lithuania and we are working with Uganda to implement the tool and to customize it based on their local needs. So the tool, although it was developed by international experts, it's not presented as a turnkey tool. So we tried to avoid to the maximum the mistake of international assistance, where you have, as soon as the international experts leave the countries, the momentum that support the initiative or the project falls down. So we wanted to create, and this is we are working to create local experts and to foster local ownership of the tool, because we know this is a main prerequisite for the tool to endure and to last over time. So for technical consideration, we need that local experts own the tool and try to work with it and to jungle with it and to try to provide answers to the questions specific to the countries. It's also a capacity building tool because, as I said earlier, it's a self-assessment. So we are now in process of training assessors in each public organizations, because this tool will assess the robustness of the anti-corruption program within each public institutions. We need also to train implementers, because before conducting the assessment, you have to create an anti-corruption program, because the tool will assess the different requirements, the implementation of the different requirements of an anti-corruption program. So the tool is not just a ticking box exercise. It's a combination between qualitative and quantitative assessment. Some criteria will assess the existence, some assessment criteria will assess the existence and the implementation of the anti-corruption requirement, and whereas other assessment criteria will assess the quality of the implementation. I can give you some example later if you want. It's also a tool that is designed and it offers a balanced approach between compliance and integrity. You know, when you implement an anti-corruption program, you have to decide between managing for compliance or managing for integrity. And the trend nowadays is toward tightening the noose around corruption, toughening rules, control, and prosecutions. And focusing on compliance may provide some short-term results, but they can have consequences and impact on the flexibility of management on the middle term and long term. So the result here is to reach an optimum combination between integrity and compliance. And this is what the tool aims for, is to start with a heavy, perhaps, compliance program, but move slightly and perhaps slowly to an integrity culture. So there are some indicators in the tool which measure to what extent the institution is migrating from a compliance culture to an integrity culture. Here are, some other distinctive characteristic of the scorecard. It helps transfer responsibility. And this is a major issue, because one of the reasons behind this is what we found with the UNDP when we studied why the first anti-corruption strategy in the Arab region failed to deliver the expected result. One of the reasons that was found is because the anti-corruption policies remained at the horizontal level, at the national level. They are not broken down into the sectoral and the level. So this tool transfers the responsibility of fighting corruption from decision makers from public institutions to each sector. So each ministry should be responsible of fighting corruption. Its management sector, its public institutions should have its own anti-corruption program, and what the tool will assess is that anti-corruption program. It helps also to spot integrity gaps. It's a normative reference system. It measures the anti-corruption efforts on the micro level, not only on the macro level, because most of indices, they tended to measure the general, the horizontal policies, but they do not go deep inside to measure their implementation at the sectoral level. Just a few words before finishing on the technical methodology. No. What you can see here in these diagrams shows what the tool look like, its structure and its layout. What you see here at the bottom are the 83 assessment criteria, where each criterion evaluates the implementation of the corresponding anti-corruption requirement. What you see here on the level above are the sub-indicators from which the assessment criteria are derived. Here what you see are the assessment indicators, and here you see the three main components of the scorecard. The first one is the planning and commitment, execution and support, evaluation and maintenance, and of course the tool should be embedded and rooted in the culture of the organizations. And the culture of organization is a critical issue, because if there is no culture at all in the organization, or if the culture is not adapted, or if the tool is not adapted to the culture, it won't work. For this reason, when we work with the local government, we try first to advise them to work on the culture of their organizations, because it's useless to implement such a comprehensive tool in an organization whereas the culture is not adapted, and it cannot accept such a tool. Here what you can see here, the three assessment components. Then from them will derive 7 assessment indicators, 20 assessment sub-indicators, and 83 assessment criteria. You would recall when I talked about the fortress, these are the stones, the assessment criteria are the stones that will help build the fortress, which will protect the management from corruption attacks. Here is the tool, just a few sections of the tool. You can see here the assessment component. The first one is planning and commitment. The assessment indicator, we will look at the establishment and implementation of an anti-corruption program. Then we will assess the quality of the establishment through these criteria, this number of criteria. Then we will give a score, and here we have the weightage of each score. Then these are some just example of how the scorecard look like. That's it. It's almost 25 pages like this, and we have to go through each assessment criteria. From that assessment criteria, we will create the corresponding anti-corruption requirement, and we will check the implementation, the quality of the implementation of that anti-corruption requirement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kamel. That was, wow, there's really a lot to unpack here. So first, could you stop sharing your screen, please? So
Yes,
that we
okay.
can.
Okay.
I think I can just stop it from here.
Yeah.
Let me just see here.
Let me go back to the. Okay.
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 Yeah. All right.
That's.
Yes. So
I hope it was not too long.
no, not at all. Not at all. We are.
I'm ready to take your questions, please.
I believe a couple of months ago we had that presentation by Luis de Sousa and Gustavo, and I think we reached the 2-hour mark. So as it used to be at the beginning of the Roundtable series, so that wasn't long enough. Thank you so much. I was taking note of a number of points that I wanted to go a little deeper into, and I promise I won't monopolize the conversation, but. While people also start putting in order notes, and I welcome everyone to please jump on the conversation. I'll get the ball rolling by asking something very, very, very simple to begin with. So that looked like a very interesting and impressive tool developed with Chandler's sessions. Is the tool available yet? Will it become available? What are the future plans for it?
Yes, the tool is available, and we have invited a number of anti-corruption commission in different countries, and we are working with some of them. We are working with the anti-corruption commission in Malawi, the anti-corruption commission with the government in Uganda. We have also interest from Bulgaria, interest from Lithuania, and we just start our first trip to Uganda was 3 months ago. We presented the tool to the government, and we mainly try to make them aware about the necessity to understand global indices, where to use the global indices, to use them to the extent of their benefit, because global indices, they continue to provide insights that are valuable, but they cannot use it everywhere. That's the problem. And we teach them, we try to make them understand how the structure of this tool and how they can implement it and what they can expect out of this tool.
Robin has already a question. He's asking who conducts the assessments?
Yeah, that's a good question. The assessment, since it is a self-assessment, the assessment is conducted by an independent unit within the public organizations. But the assessment is overseen, it's controlled, monitored by the Anti-Corruption Commission, by an independent body, which will make sure that the results of the assessment are reliable. So they took the results, the findings of the assessment, and they review randomly in some countries where they suspect that the results perhaps are not reliable.
Oh, I see. So let me ask you about that, because one of the questions that I had, it was related to the necessity of getting leadership's will. You know, for example, the concept of political will has been going around for a really long time in relation to the adoption and implementation of anti-corruption policies. And because one of the first points that you posited concerning this assessment tool is that it is homegrown, right? The data generated by the organization itself, or at least an organization within the country that is closer to the data producers. Right, Robin, I'm sorry, she had a follow-up question that is, so if the organization itself, so that the owner of the data is not the one collecting the data and providing the assessment, but is rather another national agency kind of like checking in, either auditing or conducting the external assessment of that organization. What happens in cases where there's no a single anti-corruption commission or an anti-corruption agency that could take care of it? Is that responsibility already expected to fall under one of the common organizations that we find, such as the Controller General, for example, or the Ombudsman, or so on and so forth?
Yeah, usually the most appropriate public institution to lead the implementation should be the one which is entrusted of preventions. So an enforcement agency is not suitable because they focus on enforcement. Because this tool is a tool that reinforce because it assesses the robustness of the prevention system, and it shows the gaps within the prevention system. So it must be conducted by an institution which is rather dedicated to the prevention system. So in some countries, you can have this kind of conflict. But in Uganda, we found the same because we were hesitating between both. They have one which is making policy, and they have the internal auditor, which they carry internal audit in different public institutions. So we put them together to work together and to be the responsible for the implementation. The assessment, we have chosen that the assessment is a self-assessment because it's cost-effective. But it could be an external assessment. This is possible. If we have, it could be the auditor general. It could be the auditor general. In Brazil, they have a similar tool, and it's the auditor general which is in charge of the implementation of the assessment. It's a decision that should be made by a local government to which organization this task should be assigned. To the anti-corruption commissions, but if you have the anti-corruption commission, if it combines enforcement and preventions roles, that could be conflictual, and it could be because this tool requires a lot of collaborations. It requires a lot of commitment, and we work so that public institutions see this tool as a tool to help them build their system. It's not just to monitor them, it's not them to cast blame. And for this reason, even we advise them about the publication of the results, the communication. They should communicate the results of each year, of each round of assessment based on the local context. If they will make a full publication, perhaps if they rank the organization, perhaps this some organization will resist the next year because they don't want to see their poor performance shown to the whole public. So there are a lot of precautions that should be taken so that the public institution accept voluntarily and to own the tool and to use the tool, because this is a tool that can help them to build their own prevention system.
The point about collaboration and cooperation, and again, anyone, if you would like to jump into the conversation, please don't be shy. The point about cooperation and collaboration is very, very important and interesting, right? Because you at the beginning of the presentation, you were very accurately and appropriately pointing out the challenges of international indicators and metrics. Of course, we have discussed so many times in this roundtable series about the challenges of the CPI. And yet on the other side of the spectrum, right, we have the possibility of generating data by these national or government agencies. And in the matrix that you showed us, there were some empty spaces for the specific measures that would be collecting information on. I imagine, such as uploading information to the transparency portal, taking care of requests for access to information, etc., whatever it is. And So my question is, where do we find the proper balance between just taking into consideration the anti-corruption policies as embodied already in ANCAC, for example, at the most global level, compared to the identification of potentially homegrown activities or strategies to fight corruption? And if I may make this question a little bit more complex in that relation, right? Because a challenge that I would imagine emerging is that if the process of building the instrument happens in cooperation between the agency that is being assessed and the assessor, right? The first thing that I would think about is that the measure selected could be the measure that the agency knows that they may look better in, because they already know their activities, and so maybe selecting the activities that they know that they may be scored higher compared to others where they may be shown a little some deficit in that sense. And connected to that is the question of how do we actually know which measures could have a real impact on the level of corruption? And here I bring back the conversation to the difference between measuring corruption versus measuring the capacity of the state to control corruption, right? Because in general, integrity capabilities that we consider, again, transparency, codes of ethics, etc., a lot of those initiatives are built theoretically, meaning that we really don't have a lot of empirical information in terms of how effective they've been, right? So I wonder if there are also some recipes about how organizations can go about selecting the measures to be assessed on based on their own experiences, but also in terms of how much do we actually know on output versus outcomes, or the impact that they actually have about the level of corruption within their own environments or in their own countries. I apologize in advance for that really long question. So you want me to go back to any point, just let me know.
Yeah. Actually, the tool works as a normative reference. So the public institutions, when they will make the assessment, they will make the assessment of their anti-corruption program based on these normative reference. So they cannot select which section or which activity they can assess or not. They will assess first. What they will do is they will create an anti-corruption program. They create the anti-corruption program based on the requirements of the tool. So, for instance, they should and the tool among the criteria we look to the effectiveness of the public institution, or it could be also private institutions, in dealing with the corruption cases, whether there is a system, a channel to report about corruption cases, and when corruption cases, to whom they report, and after the reporting, whether the whistleblower is protected or not protected, and how to protect this. And we ask the organization, give me the number of corruption cases that have been uncovered, and what you have done for this. Have you conducted the inquiry and investigations? And what were the consequences if the corruption cases, if the cases happen to be corruption, the punishment, etc., etc. So it's based on a dialogue between the assessor and the implementer, and the assessor should go inside in depth to understand the robustness of the anti-corruption program, whether it is just a bureaucratic system. Because if you ask, one of the criteria is, do you have a code of conduct? The organization will say, yes, we have code of conduct. Show me your code of conduct. Okay, this is my code of conduct. But this is not enough. This is the quantitative assessment that you have or you don't have the code of conduct. But we go in depth to measure the qualitative implementation of the code of conduct. Then we'll ask him some of the question. What was the process through which you wanted to draft your code of conduct? Was it inclusive? Did you ask all the employees about the principle of ethics they agree on? Did you consult them for the value of the companies? Did you provide them with the training to understand the code of conduct? Is there what we call the exemplarity, the endorsement of the top management of the code of conduct? Do the top management speak regularly about the code of conduct? How do you solve ethical dilemma? Give me some example of the ethical dilemma. So it's not just, and there is the difference between the assessment based on the provision of UNCAC, which is made by UNIDC, because UNIDC, they conduct the peer review of country to see to what extent every country is in compliance with the provision of the UNCAC. These kind of assessment, they look just for the quantitative. Okay, do you have a law about the whistleblowing? Yes, we have this law has been enacted, etc., etc. Here, since it is about public institution on the micro level, we can go in depth to analyze the quality of the implementation. Then we deduct the effectiveness of the implementation, because what we wanted to see is how the prevention system is being built, because we cannot build a prevention system with accumulating just procedure and laws, etc., etc. No, we build a prevention system by the enforcement of laws and the practice and the different assessment criteria. They are based on the local legal framework of each country. For this reason, we talk about customization, because the tool should be customized to the local framework. Sometimes you don't have, some of the criteria are not supported by local regulation. In different countries, they don't have a law about whistleblowing and protection of whistleblowing and what kind of whistleblowing, anonymous of whistleblowing, and so on. And it is also based with the most recent best practice in terms of addressing corruption, particularly the ISO 37001 anti-bribery management system, and the different ISOs of the different standard on fighting corruption. I hope that this answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does, and it sounds fantastic, because it really shows that you are integrating into a tool best international practices to a degree that indeed, because you continue highlighting the qualitative nature of it, and it really shows. Jean-Patrick.
Yes. Premièrement, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Kamel, très intéressant. Thank you very much. So it's always nice to you.
Nous allons parler français, mais...
Il y a moins de gens qui pourront suivre, so I think in French there's fewer of the people around who will be able to follow. Thank you very much. It's super interesting. And you've touched on a number of elements, so I'll make a few comments in the question. So, local aspect, I think, comes up more and more, the importance of subnational governments and all these institutions, for which we're not doing enough in terms of governance elements. The anchoring locally, we've all seen studies by somebody that does not even speak the local language do a grand study in a country and obviously did not understand anything. So I think hopefully we're definitely moving away, but so you're addressing this, and I think it's quite nice. And your comment of doing things and proposing elements that work for these institutions. So moving away, I was with Fabiano Angelico at a conference in the UK, and one of the NGO people said, well, you know, you academics are really nice, but a lot of your contribution is admiring the problem. We have done enough of the admiring. We need to get hands-on, and you're getting into that. And in your last answer to Joseph, so trying to go beyond the sort of mere box-ticking exercise. Do you have this thing? Yeah, we do. Yeah, but so what? It comes back. And this aspect of the box-ticking comes back in numerous international forums. Lately at the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa, strong messages by civil society in Africa, exactly in that direction. The model you're proposing which are very interesting, seems to be, and maybe I'm completely wrong and I understood poorly, but a proposal for quasi co-production of the analysis. That is, you provide a number of tools and they do the work. And I think these co-production elements work quite well. My question being, because all this is sensitive, and you have worked yourself in governments at the highest level, are we at a point where more secrecy would lead to better answer for institution? What I mean is that, could we use your tool, and let's say, I didn't just want, for example, the city of Tunis works with your tool, works with you, but the data remains inside, as inside knowledge, to lower the barrier of, as you mentioned, the reticence, the political issues and things like this. So are we at a point where maybe more transparency might not be the issue and maybe a bit more secrecy might lead us further?
I hope that I have well understood your question, because my connection was unstable, so the sound was not very, very clear. So you're talking about the co-productions. The co-production between who are the local government and
basically you're providing a tool to these local governments, and it allows local government within themselves to co-produce their own analyses based on your product. Which I think is great. In terms of making sure they're as effective as possible in doing this, are we at a point where you as the developer of the project say, transparency is great, openness is fantastic, we love open data, but if it's too sensitive, and if you think that all the actors would be more willing to talk, this could be a closed bubble. That is, we get the information for the bubble that is the city of Tunis, for example, and not share it. But then policy-wise, it might lead to better information for the municipality. Yeah.
I will tell you how we work, for instance, with the example that we have, and particularly with Uganda. And we try first to present to them the rationale of the tool, that to make them understand, because sometimes you start from scratch, because they have no understanding and no knowledge about what tools to select and what are the shortcomings and the limitation of different tools. They use, I know many countries which use the results of, like I did personally a few years ago, I recognize that I blindly used the results of international indices, and this was misleading, because when you go to the public opinion, and I was interviewed many times in TV and the radios to comment, and the media, they like to see that their government are, the performance of their government in terms of fighting corruption is poor, because they wanted to blame their government, and this was used by for political purpose to blame the government. So we don't really see what's going on with the performance of government. So these tools can give us a glass, magnifying glass, where we can see the performance of the government, and we can criticize them. And if we criticize, we know what we criticize. We can tell them, no, your failure is in this point. It's not in that point. It's not in the regulation. You have the best regulation. And this is what we said to the government of Uganda. And we told them they are implementing anti-corruption strategies for more than 30 years, but the results are nothing. And we told them this tool will help you understand why your successive anti-corruption strategy didn't provide the expected result, because your strategy remained at the horizontal. You didn't go vertically. You didn't go work with the public institution, because there where we should fight corruption. It's not only by enacting laws. It's not only by putting some people in jail and saying that, yeah, we put this minister in jail because of corruption. This won't solve the problem of corruption. To solve the problem of corruption, you have to look to your management and the failures, the vulnerabilities of your management, and to try to understand the different gaps in your management system, and try to envisage for each gaps, the appropriate solution to close that gaps and to close the window from which the corruption can come. So this is the co-production is to tailor the tool and to work with the 83 assessment criteria and to change some of the criteria to adapt them to their local regulations, and to perhaps they wanted to focus on some types of corruption, because in some countries or in some institutions, the procurement could be the major issue on corruption. In some others, it's service delivery. So the tool should be adapted to each country, but it could also be adapted to the nature and the specificity of each public institutions. If for the public institution where procurement is a huge issue, we needed to give some more weightage for the part about procurement and so on. So this how the tool, and we are still beginning, and we expect to learn a lot from other countries when we conduct this dialogue, because it's a very interesting dialogue from the beginning till we go. We start by a political discussion about how the government address corruption, how it sees its performance. Then we go in depth to a technical discussion, how to implement the tool and what we need to change in the different requirements and how to implement it and how to customize it to the context of the countries. We can continue our dialogue if you want later. Yes,
I would like to build on Jean-Patrick's question, and I know we're in the last 4 or 5 minutes, so I'll be quick, because we live in a period where people are pointing out about the increasing securitization of anti-corruption, right? The connection between anti-corruption efforts and national security policy. And that point about transparency, yes or no, is quite relevant there as well, because a lot of information that comes out from the assessment of vulnerabilities in terms of corruption could also be exploited by external actors, right? I do wonder if the instrument could even work at all, however, in a non-transparent environment. To what degree does the assessment require external stakeholders, such as civil society organizations or you know, the recipient of services, or the users, the citizen, in order to collect the data? Could the assessment instrument work in an environment where the agency would like to work within a bubble, as Jean-Patrick mentioned, to kind of protect the data, make everyone within the agency more comfortable about being honest? Would the instrument work in that environment or not?
Yeah, there are major prerequisites for the instrument to work. And one of the major prerequisites is, of course, there should be a strong will from government to implement and to play transparency. If there is no transparency, the instrument could not work, because this instrument supposes that the government is willing to address corruption, and there is a strong commitment from the top management, from the government first, to implement, to push their public institutions to implement the anti-corruption program, then to accept to be assessed in a very transparent way. Then there should also be a strong commitment. And we put, perhaps we can go back, if you have time, to the different criteria. The first criteria are about top management commitments, leading by example, the tone from the top. These are the main prerequisites. So if there is no transparent and sincere transparency and willingness by the top management, and the tool won't work, because we need to collect a lot of data, and there is a lot of dialogue that will take place between the assessors and the implementers. The assessor should be able to accede to different data. If there is no real willingness, it won't work. It won't work. This is something that it's a strong prerequisite for the tool to work in different parts of the world.
I think that clarifies it. Thank you very much, Kamel. I know that you need to attend a virtual meeting at the OECD's Global Anti-Corruption and Integrity Forum. So I don't want to make you be late for that. Thank you so much for a delightful and brilliant presentation. I look forward to see the results in terms of the implementation of that assessment tool. So I will be very grateful if you can keep us posted on those developments, and perhaps then later on have you again to give us some updates about that. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope to see you all again next month for next month roundtable. Have a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Arrivederci.